ドリーム終わったのか。早くスイッチもっと早く。
Sword Art Online, to put it simply, is an anime many people hold dear, myself included. According to my anime list, the first season is the 5th most popular anime of all time, which is no small feat. It was one of the very first anime I'd ever watched, and over the course of my life I've returned to it many times. Every once in a while, I would begin to feel a need to once again experience the legend that is Kirito the Black Swordsman. However, I've always found that whilst watching Sword Art Online, particularly in the later seasons, a sense of grief would begin to grow the longer I watched. It was as if I had lost something I loved. Now, I realise that might sound somewhat dramatic, but sometimes language of that sort is necessary. By the time that I would finish watching Sword Art Online, I would always be left disappointed. The reason for this, I think, is quite simple. Sword Art Online, time and time again, whilst weaving its narrative, commits a sin. Sword Art Online commits the folly of betrayed expectations. What exactly do I mean? Well, let me explain. Stories are weaved into the very heart and soul of humanity. Ever since we were simple primates, staring into the sky above, awestruck by the heavens we found staring back at us, we've been telling stories. And one of these stories, which is amongst the oldest we have, is the hero myth. Every single one of you knows what the hero myth is, even if you don't know you do. The simple reason for that is the hero myth is primordial. It is ingrained into the very being of humanity. Put simply, the hero myth goes like this. A hero, a righteous soul, is faced with a chaos of some sort. A chaos which is almost always embodied in an adversary. With the rise of this chaos, this moral challenger and malevolent adversary, our heroes must grow, learn, and struggle. By the end of our story, through their own strength and virtue, through the lessons they have learned, the hero reigns supreme. They defeat the chaos and save that which is most precious, the good, the true, and the beautiful. A perhaps comical example of the hero myth is the old Power Rangers shows. Every episode, the Power Rangers are faced with a new malevolence, a new chaos, which calls for them to learn, evolve, and grow. And so they do. By the end, they reign victorious, defeating the adversaries that face them. Everybody loves that story. We are deeply enthralled by it. When you watch another person overcome the odds, face down the dragons that would destroy them, you cannot help but be overcome with a sense of awe. Whether it be a soccer player scoring some seemingly impossible goal, or a gamer pulling off some desperate clutch play in the final moments of a game.
Happy feet, wombo combo. That ain't Falco. That ain't Falco.
Seeing victory clutch from the jaws of defeat is inherently captivating, and it's no wonder. If I were to provide you with another example, I would point to Dungeon no Danmachi. If you have not yet watched it, I implore you to do so. It's brilliant, and as I'm going to talk about it, there will be spoilers. The story begins with our main character, Bell, a boy who wishes desperately to become a hero. Bell starts his journey and becomes an adventurer. However, shortly after he begins his adventure, he is faced with chaos, that in this case takes the form of the unbridled fury of a minotaur. In the face of this threat, Bell flees, desperately unable to mount any defense against the adversary that pursues him. After all, he lacks the strength of mind, character, and body to do so. Fortunately, however, when all seems lost, he is saved by Eyes, a beautiful adventurer of strong and noble character, the very thing Bell hopes to one day become. After being saved, in the face of his ideal, Bell flees, in a mix of embarrassment, shame, and admiration. He once again resolves himself to becoming a hero, so that one day he might be worthy of standing by Eyes' side. He struggles and he learns, facing trial and tribulation, until one day he is once again faced with the Minotaur. The Minotaur's strength is great, greater even than the one that assaulted him before. so much so that it looks like Bel's victory is impossible, that once again Eyes will have to step in to save him. But Bel resists. His resolve holds. Set to that beautiful score, every ounce of strength that he can command wells up from within him, and he overcomes the Minotaur. In a blindingly heroic clash. By the end, Bel's left standing. Damaged and bloodied, but triumphant. When you watch that fight, you cannot help but feel goosebumps. Bel's story so perfectly captures the hero myth, and every fibre of your being knows it. He becomes a legend, a figure of inspiration and a model of emulation. Bel becomes a hero. But how does all of this relate to Sword Art Online? The problem is that Sword Art Online almost exclusively tells a hero myth narrative, and it almost always manages to get it wrong. The first season is the best, and judging by its popularity, most people would agree. In Season 1, we are introduced to Kirito, the legendary Black Swordsman. Kirito finds himself in a seemingly impossible life and death struggle, and over the course of Season 1, he attempts to save the lives of those he cares about. In the beginning he fails, struggling helplessly to save Sachi's life and the lives of his guildmates. By the end of the Sword Art Online arc, Kirito once again has the life of someone he loves ripped away from him. Asuna's avatar is killed, but Kirito just barely manages to destroy SAO before the nerve gear claims Asuna's life. Finally, during the second half of the season, Kirito is given one last chance to save the one he loves, to save Asuna, and this time, he succeeds. Through his own strength and virtue, he overcomes the odds and stands victorious, finally earning his happily ever after. Season 1 is not perfect. I would argue that Bel's story is far more compelling, but that's okay. Sword Art Online is not high art. The writing is mediocre at best, the narrative is original enough for its time but poorly executed, and the characters are exclusively blank slates. Kirito included. But no one is expecting Shakespeare levels of writing from Sword Art Online. Season 1 manages to do its job. It describes the hero myth well enough to make it the 5th most popular anime according to my anime list. Kirito, despite being a simplistic character to say the least, was forever cemented in our minds as the legendary Black Swordsman, that dual-wielding badass that saved Aincrad through the strength of his will and resolve. The problems arise after Season 1. In Season 2, Kirito is back, and is now dealing with some trauma from SAO. While dealing with this, Kirito must defeat a surviving member of Laughing Coffin that has resurfaced in Gun Gale Online. The problem with Season 2 is that Kirito doesn't feel the same. It's as if he's been defanged in some way, diminished. His strength of will seems lacking, his resolve seems weak, he feels like less of a hero. And I get it, I understand that he's damaged now. But surely the story would have been better if it were about him facing that trauma, accepting it and overcoming it, putting his own needs to the side for the sake of others. But that doesn't happen, at least not in a satisfying way. At times you get a glimpse of the old Kirito, of that relentless fury and will that made him such a cool character. But for the most part it's gone. To make matters worse, half of Season 2 doesn't even have him in it. The hero myth fails, because to put it simply, Kirito isn't much of a hero in Season 2, and he's barely in it. From here, things go from bad to worse. I'm going to leave Ordinal Scale aside for a second, and talk about Alicization because I believe it has the same flaws. In 2018, Sword Art Online Alicization released, and I really enjoyed it, at least at first. Alicization's pacing was slow, but purposeful. Over the course of 20 episodes or so, it builds nicely, towards the promised conclusion, and even manages to tell an interesting story and develop some interesting characters along the way. What makes things better is that Kirito feels like Kirito again, and it keeps hinting at the restoration of Kirito as that dual-wielding badass, which is great. That is what I'm watching Sword Art Online for. And a heroic tale of a dual-wielding badass striving for freedom of thought and speech over an all-encompassing tyranny sounds great, but once again, Sword Art Online fails to deliver. By the end of Alicization, we get nothing but a series of pointless threat escalations, continuous Deus Ex Machinas, and 3 episodes of our antagonist monologuing naked. And what's worse, when we finally do see Kirito dual wielding, it only lasts a moment. And it fails to even kill the villain. My problem with this ending is not that Kirito's dual wielding fails. My problem isn't even that the villain dies to her own subordinate. My problem is that the ending is not what was promised by the hero myth. The pointless threat escalations, the plethora of Deus Ex Machinas, and the constant insistence on friendship saving the day robs the hero myth of any meaning. What lesson does Kirito learn if every time he struggles and overcomes his enemies, they just inexplicably transform into something even more powerful? Why does this final blow work when all the other ones have failed? It's entirely arbitrary. By the end, Kirito overcomes the chaos that faces him not because he has earned it, or because he has grown or learned, but because the story needs him to. And unfortunately, Alicization War of the Underworld fares no better. Once again, it builds well. Kirito is broken, but his return is promised to you, and you believe it. You want nothing more than to see Kirito rise from that chair in the final moments, when the need is greatest, and show the world why he's a hero. But it never happens. Instead, we once again get treated to a series of threat escalations, Deus Ex Machinas, and another insistence that friendship will save the day. It is as if Sword Art Online completely forgot how to complete the hero myth. Every time they start well, introduce the character, set up the dominoes, but by the end, when it comes time to watch those dominoes fall, allowing the audience to revel in the satisfaction of it all, Sword Art Online decides instead to pack up the dominoes and go home, robbing the hero myth of any meaning. The problem with Sword Art Online is that it all too often fails to deliver what it promises, what the audience wants, a hero myth. There doesn't need to be a series of threat escalations, which render each noble sacrifice pointless. Imagine if in the fight with the Minotaur, just when it appears that Bell is going to win, for no other reason than a confused desire to escalate the threat, the Minotaur fully recovers and doubles in strength. It's not necessary. What made that fight great was not that the Minotaur was some insurmountable threat. There were like 4 other people there that could have defeated it easily. What made that fight great was that it was a threat to Bell and that Bell defeated it. Using his own strength, not his friends, nor his allies, his own. I love Kirito. The guy is a total blank slate of a character, but he's a hero. In my less critical moments, when I would sit watching Kirito on screen, that primitive part of my brain that in ages past would have gazed into the heavens and been awestruck by what it would see, was awestruck by Kirito. All I wanted was for him to grab his swords, grit his teeth, and prove that he could grow. That even if the future looked dark, if he strove forward virtuously, he could prevail. Because after all, if he could do it, maybe I could too.